At the family reunion, they placed me and my daughter at a separate table away from everyone else. No greetings, no hugs, no seats saved for us, just 2 folding chairs near the kitchen like we didn't belong. My daughter looked around confused. I gave her a small smile and said it was fine. It wasn't. We had barely taken our seats when my niece leaned over to another cousin and whispered just loud enough for us to hear. "She's not a real cousin anyway." My daughter heard it. Her back straightened, her lips tightened. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to make a scene in front of her. But Era stood up. She pulled something out of her little purse, a photo I hadn't seen in years. She walked across the room, her steps soft but certain. Then, in the middle of everyone, she held up the photo with both hands and said, "This is my dad. His name was Derek Vaughn. He used to own this house." Everything stopped. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Silverware paused in midair. No one said a word. The air in the room shifted. And in that moment, my daughter, the one they tried to push aside, became the only person anyone could see. "My name is Soraya Vaughn. I'm 38, a single mom, and if I'm being honest, I've spent most of my adult life staying out of family affairs. Not because I wanted to, but because I learned early on that not every door with your last name on it leads to a place that feels like home." My daughter is 11. She's got this calm confidence about her, like she already knows who she is and doesn't need the world to validate it. But she also has this hunger for connection, for stories, for pieces of her life that I've kept tucked away, especially when it comes to her father. Derek, her dad, was everything I never knew I needed. He was warm, loyal, and the only man I've ever met who didn't make me feel like I had to earn love. We weren't married when he died. We were young, figuring things out, making plans that we never got the chance to finish. He was gone in an instant, a car accident, early winter, on his way home from work. I was 3 months pregnant. Just like that, the life we were building shattered. After Derek passed, his side of the family pulled away. There were no cruel words. No drama, just silence. At first, I chalked it up to grief. Everyone mourned differently. But then the weeks turned into months, and the months into years. Invitations stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. It became clear. I was no longer considered part of the Vaughn family. I never told much about that. I gave her the good pieces of him, the stories about how he'd talked to her belly before bed, how he'd already picked out her name. I showed her photos, let her ask questions, kept his memory soft and golden. I wanted her to know the love, not the loss. So, when a formal glossy invitation showed up in the mail with gold lettering that read, "Vaughn Family Reunion hosted at the family estate," I didn't know what to make of it. It was from Aunt Marlene, Derek's aunt, the family's unofficial matriarch. I hadn't heard her voice in over a decade. At first, I didn't plan on going. I left the envelope on the kitchen table, unopened for days, but found it. She read it twice before looking up at me with her wide, curious eyes. "Do they want to meet me?" she asked. That question hit harder than I expected. I didn't know the answer, but I didn't want her growing up wondering if she was ever meant to be part of something bigger, if she was forgotten, if she was rejected before she had the chance to show them who she was. So, I said yes. We drove out that Saturday morning. It was a long ride through winding roads and changing trees. I hadn't seen the old Vaughn house in years, but it hadn't changed. White paint, wraparound porch, that tall oak tree in the front. Yard that Derek used to climb when he was a kid. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, Allura whispered, "Wow, this is where he lived." I nodded. This is where he grew up, where we first met. He took me to prom from that front door. She smiled, holding on to every word like a gift. It was a big moment for her. I could feel it. When we walked in, it was like stepping into a past life. The hall smelled like old wood and lemon polish. Photos lined the walls, faces I remembered, and some I barely recognized. A few people turned. To look, offered small nods, but no one jumped up to say hello. No one wrapped us in a warm welcome. It was polite, distant, and awkward. We were directed, yes, directed, to a smaller table off to the side of the dining room. All the name cards were already laid out. There were rows of seats for every branch of the family tree, carefully arranged like a seating chart at a wedding. But for me and Era, there was a card that simply read guests. That word stung. Guest, not family, not va. We sat down and I tried to smile for sake. I made jokes about our private table, about how it was closer to the dessert tray. She laughed, but I could see the flicker of confusion in her eyes. She was paying attention. And then it happened. Maris, my niece, Leia's daughter, leaned toward another cousin and said with a smirk, "She's not a real cousin anyway." Allah's face dropped. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me, waiting for something. Maybe a reaction, maybe a defense. I stayed silent. And that silence would be the last moment I got to protect her from the truth. The room was alive with laughter and conversations, but none of it reached our table. From the outside, it probably looked like a happy family reunion. Long-lost cousins catching up, aunts passing around casseroles, kids playing tag outside. But from where we sat, it felt like a stage we weren't invited to step on. Stirred the ice in her lemonade with her straw. She hadn't said much since we sat down. Every now and then she looked over at the main table where cousins her age were passing plates and telling stories, occasionally bursting into laughter that felt too loud, too deliberate. I tried to keep the mood light. "You want to walk around the yard later? I think there's still a swing set in the back." She nodded politely. "Maybe after lunch," but I could see it all over her face. She didn't want to be polite. She wanted to be included. She wanted someone to wave her over and ask where she was from or tell her she looked like her dad. She wanted what every child deserves, a sense that they belong. Maris and her little cluster of cousins sat at the far end of the main table, whispering and silencing in our direction. They weren't even subtle. Maris, just 13 and already fluent in mean girl theatrics, locked eyes with a moment before muttering something to the girl next to her. They both laughed. Then came the words, "She's not a real cousin anyway." Sharp, clear, loud enough to cut through every conversation around it. A few adults heard it, but chose not to react. That kind of cruelty, when ignored, doesn't fade. It spreads. No one stopped it. No one corrected her. No one stood up. I felt the air leave my lungs. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything. But nothing came out. My instinct told me to keep the peace. Don't make a scene. Don't give them a reason to whisper more. I looked at Era. She had frozen. Her hand still clutched her fork, but she wasn't moving. Her eyes didn't blink. Her face didn't crumble. But I could tell those words hit deep. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She didn't say anything. She just sat back in her chair and stared down at her plate. Inside, I was burning. But my silence didn't come from weakness. It came from exhaustion. From years of walking on eggshells around people who thought family was a bloodline measured by last names. In shared holidays, not love or memory or loss. I didn't speak because I was tired of having to justify our place in a family Derek gave his life to, but wasn't tired. She reached down and unzipped the small purse she insisted on bringing. I thought she just had her lip gloss in there and the book she always carried, but instead she pulled out a photo. It was the one she'd taken from our living room shelf that morning without me noticing. It was her dad, Derek, standing barefoot on the porch of this very house, holding up a sold sign with the biggest grin I'd ever seen. The day we closed on it together before we found out I was pregnant. He had written something on the back in his messy scroll. First home, the beginning. She held it in her lap for a second, then looked up at me. "Can I show them?" Her voice was quiet but steady. I hesitated. My instinct was to protect her, to say no, to keep her from the sting of more rejection. But something in her eyes told me she wasn't asking for permission. She was asking if I believed she had the right to speak. So I nodded. She stood slowly, photo in hand, and walked toward the center of the dining room. The chatter continued. For a few moments until someone noticed her, then someone else. Heads turned, forks paused. It didn't take long before the room fell into that soft, uncertain silence that always comes right before something important is about to happen. She turned the photo toward them and held it up with both hands, her shoulders straight and voice clear. "This is my dad," she said. "His name was Derek Vaughn, and he used to own this house." No one moved. Maris blinked, unsure of what to do with her smirk. Looked directly at her. "He was your cousin, and that means I'm your cousin, too." Her words didn't shout. They didn't accuse. But they landed like a thunderclap. She wasn't asking to be accepted. She was declaring that she already belonged. I stood up then slowly and walked to her side. I didn't need to add anything. Not yet. The power of her truth was enough. But as I placed my hand on her back, I could feel it. Something in the room had shifted. She had done what I never could. Era didn't flinch. She stood there in the middle of that old dining room, surrounded by people twice her size and 3 times her age, holding a wrinkled photo of the father she never met, like it was a shield and a sword all at once. And in that moment, the air shifted. It wasn't silent out of awkwardness. It was silent because the truth had just been placed in front of everyone like a mirror and no one could look away. She looked from face to face, calm and unwavering. "He was your cousin," she said again more softly this time. "And I'm his daughter, which makes me your family, too." No one spoke. I watched as Aunt Marlene, seated near the head of the main table, slowly removed her glasses and set them down on the tablecloth. Her lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. Uncle Ray, the only one who had even tried to smile when we arrived, stared at the photo like he was seeing Derek's face for the first time in years. And Maris, the same niece who had muttered her little line of poison not 10 minutes earlier, sat frozen in her chair, mouth slightly open, cheeks turning red. I didn't speak right away because I didn't want to dilute what had just done. She had said everything I had wanted to say for years, but with more grace, more clarity, and more courage than I'd ever been able to summon. But I could feel I slowly shifting to me, waiting to see if I'd follow her lead or shrink back into the quiet role I'd played for so long. So, I stepped forward. "All wasn't just telling a story," I said, my voice clear. "She was claiming something she's owed. Something that was never yours to deny her." I walked over to her and turned the photo around for everyone to see. This was taken on the day Derek and I bought this house. We had just moved in. He was so proud. And a month after this photo was taken, we found out we were having a Lara. A few heads dropped. Aunt Marlene looked down at her hands. Uncle Ray finally stood stepping around the table, walking slowly toward us. "I remember that day," he said. His voice was lower than I remembered, softer. "Derek called me that night, said he was going to build a life here. He was so happy." He looked down at for the first time that day, his eyes filled with something that felt like recognition. "You look just like him," he said. All gave him a small smile, and I felt the breath I'd been holding for hours finally leave my chest. But not everyone was ready to change. Cousin Leia stood up from her chair, crossing her arms. "It's been 11 years, she said. "Why now? Why show up like this?" I turned to her, not angry, just tired. "Because we were invited and because ignoring someone doesn't erase who they are." Alla looked up at me, then stepped closer. "I didn't come here to take anything," she said. "I came because I wanted to meet my family. My dad loved this place. I just wanted to know what that love looked like." Her voice cracked a little, but she held herself steady. Something about that broke whatever resistance was left in the room. Aunt Marlene stood up slowly and walked toward us. She took the photo from Era's hands and studied it. "He really did love this house," she whispered. He used to bring his tools over every weekend just to fix things that weren't broken. Then, she looked at me. I should have called you after the funeral. I should have reached out. I just didn't know how. Neither of us cried. We didn't hug, but in her voice was a trembling that felt like truth, and that was enough. I didn't come here for an apology, I said. I came because deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves to be seen, not as a guest, as a awe. The photo made its way down the line of hands. Every person who touched it seemed to fall quiet, and when it finally came back to Era, she tucked it gently back into her purse and returned to her seat. This time though, no one ignored her. Cousin Jonah passed her a bread basket. Aunt Marlene sat at the edge of our table. Even Maris glanced over and offered a tentative, embarrassed smile. It wasn't a grand apology or a dramatic shift. But it was a start. And it was sparked not by anger, not by confrontation, but by a little girl who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. The rest of the afternoon moved differently. Not faster, not louder, just softer. There was a new texture to the room, like something that had been stiff for years had finally loosened. The kind of shift you only notice when it's been tight for so long, when you finally exhale without realizing you'd been holding your breath. All sat back at the table. And this time, no one asked us to move. In fact, Aunt Marlene pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, placing a napkin in her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Cousin Jonah leaned over from the next table and asked if wanted to help hand out the dessert plates. She looked at me for reassurance, and when I smiled and nodded, she jumped up to help like she'd been waiting for the invitation all day. As I watched her, something inside me cracked open. Not in a painful way, in a way that made space. Space for pride, for release, for gratitude. This was what I had wanted for her. Not validation, not acceptance. Just the chance to show them who she was. And she did it. One by one, people began to engage, not just with her, but with me. Uncle Ray brought over a pitcher of sweet tea and filled my glass himself. He didn't say much, just offered a soft Derek would have been proud of her. I believed him. But the moment that changed everything didn't come from one of the adults. It came from Maris. She walked up to Era holding a plate with 2 slices of chocolate cake. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked nervous. Genuinely nervous. And that surprised me. She handed 1 slice to Era and said, "I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Era looked up, searching her face. Then in a voice that didn't hold anger or judgment, she asked, "Would you have said it if you knew?" Maris blinked. "Number I don't think I would have." Era took the plate and gave a small nod. "Okay." And just like that, the wall between them started to fall. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a hug. It wasn't magic, but it was real, honest. And in a room full of adults who had failed to speak up. It meant something that the first to step forward was another child. Aunt Marlene stood at the edge of the porch later that evening as the sun dipped behind the trees. She called me over. Her voice was lower than before, less commanding, more human. "I wasn't fair to you," she said. "I let Derek's death close doors instead of opening them. You didn't deserve to raise her alone without this part of him. She didn't deserve to be kept away from this house, from this family." I didn't need an apology, but her words weren't excuses. They were confessions. That mattered more. "I kept this for years," she continued, reaching into her cardigan pocket. She handed me a key, an old one, tarnished, but familiar. "It's the original key to the house. I thought maybe one day, if ever wanted to come back, it should be here. For her." I held the key in my palm, the cool metal pressing against skin that suddenly felt warm. "I don't know if she'll want that," I said quietly. "She might," she answered. "Maybe not now, but one day." I looked across the yard. Era was on the porch swing, laughing with a group of cousins who had ignored her just hours ago. And yet, she sat there as if she'd always been part of them. Not forcing it, not performing, just being. That laugh, it sounded like Derek's. Not exactly. Close enough that I felt it in my chest. It was then I realized that this wasn't just about claiming a seat at the table. It was about reclaiming a history that had been kept from her, about building something new from the pieces he left behind. As we packed up to leave that evening, asked if she could keep the photo in her purse. Of course, I said. She looked back at the house, then up at me. I think he would have been proud of me. I smiled. He would have been in awe of you. And in that final moment, as we walked down the steps of the house her father once called home, I knew the silence that had once surrounded us was gone, replaced not by noise, but by presence, by connection, by truth. And that was everything. The car ride home was quiet. Not in the way silence feels when something's wrong, but in the way it feels when something important has ended. Era stared out the window, the photo of her father resting in her lap, one hand lightly covering it. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in that soft gold that makes the world look kinder. She didn't say much at first, and I didn't push her to. About halfway down the winding road away from the Vaughn house, she finally spoke. I thought it would feel different. I glanced at her. Different how? She shrugged, still watching the trees pass. I don't know. I thought I'd either feel like part of the family or like I'd never want to go back, but it's kind of both and neither. I smiled at that because I knew exactly what she meant. Family, real family, is messy. It doesn't always wrap itself neatly in warm hugs or shared traditions. Sometimes it's a knot you have to untangle. Sometimes it's something you have to fight. For, even if you shouldn't have to, you don't have to decide how to feel today. I told her, you just did something really brave, and sometimes being brave doesn't feel good right away. It just feels necessary. She nodded, then leaned her head against the window. I thought about what had happened. Not just the photo, not just the silence that followed it, but what came after. The shift, the small acts. Uncle Ray refilling my tea, Aunt Marlene standing beside us instead of behind closed doors. Maris offering more than just words. For years, I'd let silence fill in the blanks of our story. I thought it was better not to force anything. But maybe deep down, I believed that showing up would only confirm that we didn't belong. And I was wrong. Because didn't show up to be tolerated. She showed up to be known. And in doing that, she reminded me that identity isn't something people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. In the weeks that followed, a few things began to change. Aunt Marlene sent a box in the mail. Inside were old photos of Derek as a boy, a high school yearbook with notes in the margins, and a letter she'd written but never mailed. After his funeral, read it twice. Maris sent a video message through her mom's phone saying she wanted to learn more about Derek. All recorded a response sitting on the edge of her bed holding up her favorite photo of him saying this was his favorite hoodie. Mom says he wore it even in the summer. We didn't become part of every group chat or get invited to every Sunday dinner. That wasn't the point. The point was that the story was no longer sealed shut. The silence had been broken. The door had opened and had walked through it on her own terms. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Alara walked into the living room with the key Aunt Marlene had given me. "Do you think I could ever live in that house someday?" she asked. I looked at her, not surprised, but deeply moved. "If that's what you want, yes. It'll always be part of your story." She held the key in her palm and smiled. "Then I'll keep it safe." Watching her, I realized that the moment she stood up in that room and told the truth, her truth, something shifted, not just in the family, but in me. I stopped carrying shame for how things had ended. I stopped apologizing even in my head for not being enough to make them include us because we were never the problem. We were the missing part of the story. And now it was whole. If this story touched you even just a little, take a moment to let us know. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong? Or has someone stood up for you in a way you'll never forget? I read every comment and I'd love to hear your story, too. If you felt something while watching, if courage moved you, if this reminded you of someone you love, share this video with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time is all someone needs to feel seen. And if you want more real, honest stories like this, stories about family, about truth, about finding your voice, hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this with me. And most of all, thank you for being part of the